At 6:04 in the evening on June 24, 2026, the ground beneath Venezuela's northern coast shifted. Not gradually, not with warning. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake tore open a fault line 100 miles west of Caracas. And that was just the beginning. 39 seconds later, before the shaking had even stopped, before a single person could get up from the floor, a second earthquake struck. A 7.5 notch, larger, shallower, angrier, 3 times the energy of the first. The USGS labeled it a doublet. Scientists said it almost never happens. The people of Caracas called it the worst thing they had ever felt in their lives. By the time the ground went quiet, at least 250 buildings had collapsed or been critically damaged. The international airport had shut down entirely. A coastal city called La Guaira, just 10 miles north of the capital, had been declared a disaster zone, and more than 46,000 people were unaccounted for. Not confirmed dead, not confirmed alive, simply gone from the records. This is the story of what happened in those 39 seconds, why this particular fault system made it possible, and what the footage coming out of Venezuela reveals about a geological threat that scientists had been tracking for over a century. Venezuela sits at one of the most geologically complex boundaries on the planet. To the north, the Caribbean plate. To the south, the South American plate. These two massive slabs of crust do not simply push against each other. They grind horizontally, with the Caribbean sliding eastward at roughly 20 millimeters per year. That is the width of your thumbnail, every year, for millions of years, and all of that accumulated motion has to go somewhere. It goes into a 1,300-kilometer system of strike-slip faults that runs across the entire northern edge of Venezuela, from the Venezuelan Andes in the west all the way to the island of Trinidad in the east. Scientists call it the Boconó San Sebastián El Pilar fault system. It is the most seismically active geological structure in Venezuela, and on June 24th, a critical segment of it finally let go. The June 24th rupture struck near the San Sebastian Fault segment, a structure that runs mostly offshore, just north of the Venezuelan coastal range, angling past Caracas, at distances close enough to shake the capital to its foundations. The epicenters of both earthquakes were located near the coastal town of Morón in the state of Yaracuy. They were approximately 3 miles apart, and the second, larger event struck at a depth of just 10 kilometers, shallow enough that almost all of its energy transferred directly upward into the buildings above. This is important. Depth is everything in earthquake science. A 7.5 at 60 kilometers depth is terrifying. A 7.5 at 10 kilometers is catastrophic. The shaking intensity in La Guaira reached levels between 8 and 11 on the modified Mercalli scale, the range that runs from severe to violent. In practical terms, that means well-built structures sustain heavy damage. Vulnerable ones do not survive. And Venezuela has many vulnerable ones. By morning on June 25th, the footage was undeniable. Aerial video taken above La Guaira showed entire apartment buildings that had simply ceased to exist. Concrete floors stacked on top of each other like collapsed pancakes, pipes and rebar jutting into the air. The personal belongings of dozens of families scattered across piles of rubble. A large waterfront hotel in the coastal city of Macuto had been reduced to debris. In Catia Lamar, video showed high-rise buildings with facades sheared off, exposing the interior floors to open air. In Caracas itself, a building in the Chacao neighborhood, known locally as the Petunia Building, collapsed. At least 11 people died inside it. In the Los Palos Grandes neighborhood, rescue teams were working through the night, trying to extract residents trapped in a damaged apartment block. Hospitals across the city were overwhelmed. At the José María Vargas Hospital in La Guaira, patients were being treated outdoors because the wards inside were full. Hallways at Caracas's Hospital de Clínicas showed ceilings caved in and plaster across the floors. Venezuela declared a state of emergency. School was canceled nationwide. Rail services were suspended. Simón Bolívar International Airport, the country's main international hub, suffered structural damage and closed entirely. The internet went dark across large sections of the country as power and telecommunications infrastructure failed. NetBlocks, the connectivity watchdog, confirmed a sharp drop in network traffic immediately after the quakes. In some of the worst-hit areas, communications have not yet been fully restored. And that communication blackout is part of what makes the 46,000 missing figure so haunting. It does not necessarily mean 46,000 people are dead. It means 46,000 people cannot be accounted for because phones are offline, because roads are blocked, because entire communities in La Guaira simply cannot be reached yet. The official death toll, which stood at 235 as of June 26th, is almost certainly going to rise significantly as rescue teams penetrate areas that remain inaccessible. Now here is the part of this story that goes beyond the immediate immediate crisis. Because what happened on June 24th was not random. It was, in a very real geological sense, expected. The Boconó San Sebastián El Pilar fault system has produced catastrophic earthquakes at intervals throughout Venezuelan history. In 1641, a major quake damaged Caracas. In 1766, another struck. Then came March 26, 1812. The date is branded into Venezuelan historical memory. On that afternoon, at around 4 p.m., a sequence of earthquakes ruptured the Boconó fault system, destroying Caracas so completely that a Venezuelan newspaper suggested founding a new capital city elsewhere. Estimates of the death toll range from 15,000 to 30,000 people. For context, the entire population of Caracas at the time was only around 40,000. Then in 1900, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck the northern coast, the largest instrumentally recorded event in Venezuela until June 24th of this year. Then, silence. For 126 years, the San Sebastián segment of this fault system had not produced a major rupture. Stress accumulated. The plates kept moving. The energy had nowhere to go. Scientists studying the fault described portions of it as a seismic gap, a segment that had not released enough energy relative to the motion it was accumulating. Seismic gaps are not a guarantee that an earthquake is coming, but they are a warning that when energy releases, it may release all at once. On June 24th, two segments of that system ruptured within 39 seconds of each other. That is what makes a doublet so unusual and so devastating. A standard earthquake is one rupture event. A doublet is two nearly simultaneous ruptures, close in space and time, potentially on adjacent fault segments. The USGS seismologist Paul Earle told NPR that decoding what actually happened tectonically is still ongoing. When they're right together, he said, it's hard to understand what would happen. The seismograph signals of the two events overlap, making it difficult to precisely disentangle the rupture mechanics. But the ground truth record is unmistakable. Two magnitude 7+ earthquakes, 39 seconds apart, both generating red pager alerts from the USGS simultaneously. Think about what that means structurally. A building that survives a 7.2 has already sustained damage, weakened joints, cracked concrete, compromised load-bearing elements. Then, before any of those structural deficiencies can be evaluated or shored up, a 7.5 arrives. The building that survived the first earthquake is no longer the same building. It is weaker, more brittle, less able to absorb the additional stress. That is the insidious physics of a doublet, not just one catastrophic blow, but a 1-2 sequence that exploits the vulnerability created by the first. Imagine pressing your palm flat against a cracked ceramic plate and pushing down steadily. The plate bends, but holds. Now imagine someone strikes it from the other side 39 seconds later. That is what happened to La Guaira's building stock on June 24th. Venezuela's vulnerability is not only geological, it is structural, economic, and systemic. The USGS pager model estimates a 39% probability that economic losses from this event fall between $10 billion and $100 billion, and a 30% probability that they exceed $100 billion. That upper scenario would represent roughly 20% of Venezuela's entire GDP. The country was already in crisis before June 24th. Years of economic collapse, deteriorating infrastructure, a healthcare system running far below capacity. The Jose Maria Vargas Hospital in La Guaira was overwhelmed within hours. Volunteers began carrying supplies from Caracas to the coast on foot because heavy rescue equipment could not reach the site fast enough. Almost 24 hours after the earthquake, residents were still digging through rubble with their hands. The human weight of this is staggering. La Guaira state is home to hundreds of thousands of people. Caracas, the capital, holds nearly 3 million. The combined population of the states most severely affected, La Guaira, Carabobo, Aragua, Miranda, Trujillo, represents tens of millions of Venezuelans. The USGS modeled a 44% probability that the final death toll exceeds 10,000. At that number, every seat in Madison Square Garden would hold a victim, and there would need to be 24 Madison Square Gardens to contain them all. International teams were already deploying as of June 25th. Search and rescue units from Fairfax County, Virginia, and Los Angeles County, California, were en route. Mexico sent teams. The United Nations activated its humanitarian response apparatus. The Red Cross pledged support. Simón Bolívar International Airport remained closed, complicating logistics for incoming aid. Some teams were rerouting through neighboring Colombia. What scientists are watching now is the aftershock sequence. The USGS issued a forecast, a 99% probability of at least one magnitude 4 aftershock in the week following June 24th, a 24% probability of a magnitude 6. That is not a small number. A standalone 6.0 earthquake causes significant damage. In the context of a city where 250 buildings are already critically compromised, where rescue workers are operating inside partially collapsed structures, a magnitude 6 aftershock is not just a geological statistic, it is a direct threat to the people trying to save lives. Venezuela does not have an earthquake early warning system. There are no sensors deployed to detect the first seismic waves and send alerts to phones before shaking intensifies. The 80-year-old woman in southern Caracas who compared this earthquake to 1967, even worse than the one in '67, had no warning beyond the few seconds of light shaking before everything accelerated. The 41-year-old office worker who received a notification on her phone described picking it up just as the light shaking began. And then, less than 2 seconds later, everything started moving. 2 seconds. That is not preparation time. That is barely enough time to think. The aftershock window closes slowly. In the days ahead, geophysicists will map the full rupture area from the distribution of aftershocks. A 7.5 strike-slip event typically produces a rupture 100 to 200 kilometers long, with several meters of slip on average. That data will tell scientists exactly which portions of the fault system broke, and equally importantly, which portions did not. Because the segments that did not rupture are still storing energy, the El Pilar Fault, running east toward Trinidad, has its own history of large earthquakes. Whether stress transferred to it on June 24th is not yet known, but seismologists will be watching its microseismic activity with great attention in the coming weeks. The number to watch is this. If aftershock magnitudes exceed 6.5 within the next 30 days, that signal would suggest the fault system is not settling. It would suggest that the doublet on June 24th may have transferred stress onto an adjacent segment, and that Venezuela's seismic crisis is not finished, but continuing. The footage from La Guaira reveals a city in ruins. But it also reveals something that goes beyond this event, a fault system that has been accumulating energy since 1900, a country that had almost no margin left to absorb a catastrophe of this scale, and a geological reality that the rest of the Caribbean basin is watching very carefully right now. Subscribe to stay ahead of what's coming.